So we basically all know the deal with things when it comes to Blizzard, right? There's a sort of multi-step plan to the company getting its, in terms of its video game output anyway, its shit in order, and essentially to make the trend line go in a good direction again. What does that basically mean? It means Overwatch 2 ending up in a good place, it means World of Warcraft ending up in a good place, and of course it means Diablo being in a good place. We would talk about the other craft, which was StarCraft, but of course that is, on the back burner for quite some time. To recap the progress on that, well, Overwatch 2, great game, rubbish product. Season 2, they're trying to make things better. It is a bit better. There is absolutely room to go, though, and you can check out our video on that. On World of Warcraft Dragonflight, it so far is an interesting situation. To me, who's been very critical of the game, Matt, who's been very critical of the game, Dakor, who is here a little bit more behind the scenes and has been very critical of the game, we've pretty much all had a glowing impression of the honeymoon period of the Dragonflight expansion as compared to the same period in the previous 2 expansions. We also all pretty much think that the underlying game design is in a broadly better position, and that the World of Warcraft development team, now being 50% larger, is better positioned to deliver ongoing content. At least on the ongoing content front of Overwatch 2, it does appear like they're able to maintain this marathon pace, which, with a season with either a hero or a map, basically every 2 months, it is a pretty damn aggressive content schedule, but I suppose in a world where you've got your Apexes and stuff, maybe that's the kind of thing you need. So the next part of the puzzle then is Diablo 4, and for them to really get it back, it's going to require the unannounced survival game to come out in big successful fashion. Now as for D4, currently the belief per leaks is that it is going to be coming out April 2023. We're also believing the pre-orders will actually open up this very month, along with them having some sort of feature at Jeff Keighley's Game Awards. Now, of course, we've got Blizzard themselves who have been doing some closed beta testing of the game. Now, this has been under a non-disclosure agreement, and they actually tested eligibility for this based on how much people had played Diablo on their Battle.net account. Yeah, including Immortal, but while Immortal is a humongous stain on Blizzard's reputation, and will remain so for as long as it exists and is out in the market, at least with 4, we've quite resoundingly learned that those pay-to-win things are not going to be the case. It is going to be monetized as a live service game. The current expectation is that that will mean that seasonal content will be, more thick and fast than it was with Diablo 3. So, with a combination of some of the NDA people, of course, leaking things, and also them sitting down to talk about some topics with IGN, we have a little bit of a broad update on D4, as well as some comment from, the original Diablo people, which sure is interesting. So, IGN ended up speaking to Joe Shelley and Rod Ferguson. Of course, Rod's probably the name most people will recognize. He's been around the industry quite a bit. He's a general manager. Joe is the game director. So, world tiers then, they've detailed how these essentially work. And you'll remember in the earlier days of Diablo 3, they were talking about monster power, and then that turned into the difficulty settings that game ended up having. Well, their version of that is called world tiers, right? So world tier number 1 is basically tuned for people who are primarily concerned about the story or perhaps are newer to Diablo. So very much is going to be a cakewalk. The second world tier, Veteran, though, is for the more experienced people with a more appropriate level of challenge, better reward, it's harder, you get what we mean. Now, as you progress to the level cap of 100, you get access to more world tiers as you go. And this is what begins to educate us as to the broad setup of this game, because, of course, it's essentially trying to take Diablo 3 and I think kind of have that MMO kind of multiple player, more live-ish feeling experience, and they're trying to do that. And in fairness, when that is present in Diablo Immortal, it's not a bad thing. The problem, of course, is everything else in Diablo Immortal. So these world tiers essentially do act in a similar enough manner to the difficulties of Diablo 3, right? So you will get better gear, that will let you kill monsters faster, you'll get better loot, which will make your numbers go up, which will make you be able to ascend to the next world tier. So for a lot of players, perhaps like myself, who are more focused on like, well, what's the amount of novel experience that I can get from this game? Do I just have to do the same thing again and again and again? You know, the old meme people have for MMOs and games like Diablo, where it's like, ah yes, kill mobs, get gear, make number go up, kill mobs, get more gear, number go up. Oh wait, I've just been doing the same thing for multiple months and I've got nothing out of this. Are they going to tackle that? Well, here's what Ferguson said. Having a way to measure your progression through world tiers in Diablo 3 through torment levels, that idea that as you become more powerful, you want to challenge yourself and then challenge yourself, to get better loot, which means you need more of a challenge. Diablo really shines when you find that sweet spot. Right, so essentially, I think a situation there where that ended up being so slow with launch Diablo 3 that it didn't really feel meaningful, but then you have you have a bit of a problem where, well, how much do you juice it up? He says, once you really feel like you've dominated World Tier 1 and are like, I'm unstoppable, there's nothing interesting for me here in terms of combat or loot, then you can go up to the next World Tier. So Sacred and Ancestral items will only be in the later world tiers, and some of those will be unique to the highest world tiers, right? So this is essentially just them kind of building up the layered difficulty mode of this game, which of course means it's the later tiers that we're going to care about. What are they like? Do they offer people a unique experience? Well, they are offering the sacred and ancestral stuff. That will obviously be pretty damn important to how you build your character. So, for these, a new challenge is added to World Tiers 3 through 5, where you have to defeat a final boss in order to unlock the next World Tier, including the final tier at level 100. Okay, so when you hit level cap, there is a final world tier, and you actually do have some bosses to fight as you go up there. Basically, a gatekeeper preventing you. You have to demonstrate that you're good enough to defeat the gatekeeper boss, and then you can ascend through the world tiers. So, whenever it's framed like that, I actually start to think, oh, okay, this is quite a bit better. It feels like a natural progression rather than a toggleable difficulty setting. And a lot of things in games is about presentation and feel. Sometimes very similar mechanics have a widely different resultant effect in the in the hands of a user, depending on how a user is presented with those mechanics. It's the sort of thing where, games, yeah, it's a science. Also, it is an art. Now, the end of the campaign is not the same as level 100. Hitting the level cap of 100 is basically your kind of like, as far as I can tell, your major endgame goal. After that point, it's going to be about further progression, getting more diversity in combat effects, that kind of thing. So, on the topic of that individual customization then, because one of the shining things about a game like Path of Exile is, goddamn, look at those skill trees. And that's definitely something they've been trying to do more of with this game. So, here's what's said. One of the things I love about D4 is that more than any of the previous games, there's so much more choice in how you lean into the power fantasy. What does your barbarian look like? What does your sorceress look like? What are the skills that you're using? How do you leverage them? And this is where it starts to get a bit more interesting to me in terms of, design perspective, and perhaps some things that will end up contrasting Diablo 3. So, to start off in this point, they talk about how you can pull legendary effects off gear and add them onto other gear. I actually really do like that. That's something that was in the legendary, was it the essence extraction that was in Diablo Immortal? You know what? Yeah, that was a good feature. There's a lot of problems with Diablo Immortal, but that was not one of them. So they're overall saying this is about your power fantasy, your class, your build. And this is what they try to really dive in on when they talk about the open world design of the game. So this is where it's starting to get more interesting to me. How do they approach the player building their character? How does this world feel like? I remember Diablo 3 before Adventure Mode and after Adventure Mode. Of course, you look at Diablo 4, it's significantly more open world. That definitely opens up a hell of a lot more opportunity, I think. So let's dive into how this is actually going to work in the game. needs to effectively show you all the cool things you can do without turning them into a task list. There are like 30 flags. I guess I gotta do all these 30 flags here, making sure the map doesn't just turn into a checklist. So how do they do that? Anywhere in the open world, you can stop and a monster could attack you. Basically, they've designed around a lot of density. Actually, to the stage where they had to scale the world up because things were getting a little bit too dense. So I imagine their overall plan is that if you try to go out with a specific set of objectives, things will naturally happen in the open world that will pull you in different directions, right? You know the way in a good open world game versus a bad open world game. You want to go to the place that you want to go to, and along the way you have an adventure. If that's the sort of thing we're talking about, then that's good. And what I did like is them actually referencing Breath of the Wild. I mean, it's not exactly the sort of game you'd expect to crop up with Diablo, but they did reference it, okay? They said, that's not really our story. Our story allows non-linearity, but it is a story. We want it to start in a certain place and end in a certain place. It's more of a branching story, and you can choose what order you want to play through the branches. So it's quite interesting. Now, they say that while suggesting that on repeat playthroughs, you may go, say, straight to Act 3 of the narrative to give yourself a challenge. So clearly the acts are being structured in a way that is different to what we expect, where, I mean, what, do the acts technically follow on for each other, but other than the start and the end, anything in between those could be played in any order? Is that roughly what they're talking about? It's sort of hard to know, and undoubtedly a design challenge actually making that kind of thing work. That said, when you're replaying it for the 15th time, you're not really thinking about playing the story again. You're thinking about, well, what are the bosses? What are the dungeons in these acts? How does that work? Or, of course, you could just not do that. You could just engage with the world systems, right? Where they just say you can not pursue story for a while. You can go do the side quests off the golden path, but you will eventually come back to the story for the end of the game, and the campaign will, that'll be the path that you come back to after you are exploring around. Right, so overall, feeling a little bit different. It almost, you can see the games that came out after Diablo 3 coming in here with influences, right? Like, you can see the Path of Exile influences. You can see the sort of Lost Ark-ish influences as well. Perhaps also some influences from the more open-ended, like open-world content that's there in Warframe, but I only really have a passing knowledge of that game, so I wouldn't particularly take anything I say about Warframe with, anything major, but I seem to get that gist anyway. Going back to the freedom thing then, so their goal, of course, is to make the classes feel distinct in terms of their gameplay, and what I kind of noticed here is, actually for me, it's respecking, because this does bring up a very interesting point of friction that has existed with, say, Torchlight 1, sort of changed a wee bit into Torchlight 2, you have a lot of the Blizzard North developer comments in and around that time, you then have a lot of the controversy around Diablo 3, I mean, I was there watching BlizzCons as a World of Warcraft player in, 2008, 9, 10, was it 11 that they skipped? I can't exactly remember. But around that time anyway, when Diablo 3 was one of the things that was being talked about, and the casualification of D3 as compared to D2 was a pretty damn major and pretty friggin' heated discussion topic going on at that time. And man, it's starting to make me feel kind of old. Anyway, they want a situation where players don't look at a skill tree, say it's too complicated, and then look up a best build on a website. They're talking about making things clear for players, but also having a lot of depth in their builds. One of the ways they're doing this is via keywords. I think a lot of digital card games pushing keywords as a design idea has certainly helped players just conceive how a lot of mechanics work in a way that's really quite elegant. It's a good innovation and standardization, I would say. And I mean, video games, we always do have to look back in reverence, not just look back, look aside in reverence to, to our paper-based and board-based counterparts, because there's a lot of great lessons that we can learn from over there. Now, this is what's interesting to me. You can respec point by point by spending gold, but this gets more expensive as you level. And their aim, and this is why I bring it up, is to move away from the Diablo 3 set-based respec. Basically, it was the idea in D3 that you were kind of going for those, was it green was the color? Those sets. And those would be very build defining, and your character was like water and could just shift around to be optimal based on whatever gear that you're wearing, right? So the suggestion here is that at high enough levels, the expense of respecking your character may be so much that it's better to re-roll than to respec. And that is getting kind of crazy and interesting to me. Like, what are they trying to do? I remember a funny situation that happened with World of Warcraft Legion, right? And hey, if you want to learn about what mythic World of Warcraft players are like and how serious they take being optimal, get a load of this. You had some basically like accelerated progression for your first 2 legendary items, right? But those legendary items would drop in a random fashion with 0 player targeting. Some legendaries would just be amazing throughput, other ones would be utility that was less useful. So people actually found out that rather than grind for legendary 3 or 4 in their character, they were actually just better off boosting another character to level 100, then leveling it to level 110, and then earning the first 2 legendaries, because that ended up being optimal, right? With Diablo 3, the way that your character build was not locked in was a humongous departure from Diablo 2. Where, the way you were building your character like that, respecking all the time, that was not a thing. And that is pretty damn interesting. So that they are trying to essentially go more in a choices matter way, and I guess what they want you to do is maybe for that season or, for that character, you're going to build it in a direction. And by the time you've got to a high enough level, you've probably broadly settled in on what the direction for your character is going to be. And at that point, it's less like you just saying, no, I don't want this bleed-based build, I want this build instead. No, it's more like, this is the statue that you've made? You can chip away at bits and modify it, but you're over here now. Now, obviously, it seems like you would be able to totally respec, but that would just cost a hell of a lot of gold. So interesting. And I also have to wonder with their whole thing of, the seasons forcing new characters whenever they come out, like, is this all there to encourage a situation where players are like, wow, look at all of these skills and like the power on boards and all of that. I could take this barbarian in so many different directions, supported by all of this different gear. And because I can extract essences, the legendary essences from the gear, well, then I can mix and match my status effects a bit more easily around my chosen character build. And I guess, is that how they are trying to get that replayability from a seasonal model? And that's something that I bring up because, honestly, I'm not at all interested in a game that is seasonal in the way that they are. If we're talking about a Diablo-like game, I suppose I'd probably rather a more traditional MMO feeling thing, like a game like, say, Lost Ark, where, you do all your stuff, you kill your raid bosses, and then in a few months, developers release a new raid with harder bosses and some better gear, and I continually progress the same character, a character that I get attached to over time. That's, I suppose, from an RPG player's perspective, I mean RPG as in role-playing game, not RPG as in numbersy seasonal character game, because of course this is the games industry. Genres and words do certainly have their meaning be diluted as time goes on. So it's overall quite interesting with how this game is shaping up. And to look through a lot of the comment on this, there does seem to be quite a lot of positivity. However, we did, looking at what people are saying about the endgame beta, yeah, we did see, a little bit of pushback. One of the things that Force also pointed out is that so far none of those like gatekeeper bosses are particularly difficult. But again, that surely is just a short-term tuning thing. Or is it the case that Blizzard kind of undershot the bar there, or that they, they opened their testing to really dedicated Diablo players who are probably going to be building just very naturally because they're good at this genre and they're good at kind of mathing it out on the fly, who are just naturally going to make a really good optimal character and then just absolutely melt it. Whereas, I don't know, maybe me or you wouldn't have that experience. At this stage, it's obviously hard to tell. For some other people, it seemed that they needed a bit more signposting, perhaps just things being lost in the open world. Also, some talk about, like, you know, player base splitting. This is one that certainly, this is a comment we found just over on the Reddit that does encapsulate a lot of my personal fears of the game like this. I'm not hyped for this. It seems like there's a core game and just multipliers. This is going to be Diablo 3 2, disappointed. Now, I suppose I want to see how their seasonal content model is going to play out over time. From what I understand, in a game like Path of Exile, a new season ends up being pretty exciting for players, even though they've obviously played through a bunch of that content before, because there are materially impactful systems changes, new features, things like that, that come in that really do shake up the experience. Perhaps make players reevaluate their character builds, try to do something differently. So if Diablo 4 is going to be like that, and because this is a more, like, this is a premium AAA game, right? That does have this live service that's bolstered by a bunch of content. Hopefully, they're able to do that in a way that actually adds more content to the world, such that, you know, doing the seasonal character actually does feel like a novel enough experience. For me, Diablo 3 seasons never cut it. Like, I just kind of looked at that and I'm like, man, there's not enough. No. Right? That was my take with D3. If they can juice that up enough, though, well, maybe we could be talking, right? I mean, the idea of the Diablo world, I really like. I like the dark shit. When they said, you know, Diablo 4, embrace the dark. Like, gone are the days of Diablo 3 where, I mean, very interesting situation with Chris Metzen, you know, his changing, I suppose, spiritual relationship with himself as compared to where he was during the production of Diablo 1 and Diablo 2. It's just like, hey, that's interesting stuff. You know, for me, I really do want the, I want the pentagrams and blood and all of that. That's why I'm here. So the idea of this, like, pretty immersive seeming world that seems to have a lot of content, if they keep on adding to that, I mean, how can they push the story forward a little bit in these seasonal updates? Like, what can they do? How far can they push the boat? And I think that's something worth bringing up when you think about Overwatch 2, which, to give it credit, like, they've said, hey, every 9 weeks, new season. So far, they seem to be sticking to that. And, you know, this latest season, it has a new map, it has a new hero, it has, you know, one of those, like, co-op PvE modes as well that they, you know, they've added in for that. Like, damn. Okay. They're getting the content out. They've clearly invested in the pipeline. If they've done similar for D4, well, that'll be an interesting situation. Now, of course, this takes me back to the days of listening to Total Biscuit, the podcast like Blue Please and all of that. And, you know, those days when we were talking about, okay, David Breivik and co, how are things a bit different? Of course, I remember, I believe it was David and some of, you know, some of his people were, you know, voicing opinions. And was it Facebook? I can't exactly remember what it was, but basically it was some Diablo 3 devs kind of being like, oh, screw those guys, they're being haters, and then that leaked out online, and then it was a whole big drama, and then that drama sort of was coalesced around the game mechanic debate that was going on at that time with Diablo 3, which basically was about, can you respec? How free should that be? So it's always interesting to see how this is going. So overall, he says, well, it wasn't the direction I would have gone in, but I didn't, or I don't have any choice. I left Blizzard. It's their IP, so they can go in the directions they want to go in. I think they've done a good job with Diablo, and I look forward to new products in the IP. I think it's really difficult when people compare Diablo today with Diablo 2. Firstly, people have a tendency to look at Diablo 2 through rose-colored glasses, and it makes it hard to compare any new product to something that people remember so fondly. So basically, he's broadly respectful to Blizzard, acknowledging, I guess, the historic, the historic nature of Diablo 2 and how dedicated people can be. Now, on Immortal and monetization stuff, he just said it's not the direction he'd have gone in, but as a whole, you know, you can recognize that people still adore the franchise. Basically saying that Diablo still has a bunch of goodwill. People do love the IP. They love the stories. Diablo 3 changed a lot since its launch and has a huge following. Millions have played and enjoyed Diablo 3. People seem to really like Immortal as well. And though there are disagreements about the business model, the game seems to be doing quite well. And I mean, Yikes. But true. It seems. Maybe we should revisit what we can tell from the long-term revenue data of that game. I mean, my opinion with Immortal was, oh my god, they could have done it, but instead it's this. Immortal showed that you could have a top-tier, super fun, awesome action RPG, awesome Diablo entry on mobile phones. A game that I would happily, snap my Backbone controller onto my iPhone, play it when I'm on the train, play it when I'm on the plane, which I guess because it's always online I wouldn't be able to do. Cool. Well, you know how it is. But instead, because they basically turned the gems into a gacha game, you made it shitty. And hey, it's just a gem. It's not a new waifu with more powers. Come on, guys. Learn how to monetize. Anyway, interesting situation. Bit of a generational shift since Diablo 3. Path of Exile exists. Lost Ark exists. I think it's fair to say Warframe exists too. It's a massive brand name. When I look at this Diablo, I see incredible looking production values. I see a combat model that looks really interesting. I see a world that I just want to spend time in. So, as a fantasy-driven player, fantasy as in gameplay fantasy, who also does happen to like dark fantasy settings, Diablo 4 is very well aligned to essentially be what I would actually like from a Diablo product. For me, it's just going to be, can they turn it away from just, greater rifts into endgame experience, and a seasonal content model actually feels novel enough to, I guess, from my perspective, be interesting to me, a more experience-driven player who perhaps wouldn't be as driven to Path of Exile. Yet the problem that they have is, it's Diablo, it's mass market, perhaps a bit more mass market than Path of Exile. Path of Exile is like, yo, we are an ARPG for people who love ARPGs. And, from targeting that niche super well, they expanded to incredible heights. But Diablo is just like, oh, yo, hello, we're going to get 20 million sales, we're Diablo. So they have to manage appealing to the Path of Exile player, the Lost Ark player, and me. Oh, that's a pretty hard one. Ultimately, I'd say, this trio of players, I'm probably the least important. I'm not going to stick around as much as those guys will, so the game has got to be right for them first. I guess I just wonder, you think about what Blizzard is and what Blizzard means, generally it's easy to pick up, hard to master, loads of depth, gameplay first, and somehow still also a very broad church. It's going to be fascinating to see this. World of Warcraft's moving in a good trajectory. Overwatch 2, having some stumbles. Diablo 4, I think it is set up to at least sell through incredibly for launch. After that, I can't tell the future. But, sometimes we talk about, how many points does it take to make a trend line? People will generally say 3. Overwatch 2, by the numbers, it's pretty okay, actually. We have criticisms of it, and a lot of people have criticisms of it, but hey, unlike Halo Infinite, it actually is bringing out plenty of content as the weeks roll on. So, Overwatch 2 is probably decent enough. Dragonflight's actually pretty damn good. If this ends up being pretty damn good, that is an upward-headed trend line. And then if you start having perhaps a BlizzCon 2023, where they unveil this survival game. We've seen a lot of survival games, but, there's a lot of that Lost Ark jank. And you kind of look at Valheim, and it's like, Valheim was super awesome because it just didn't do, it chose what to do and what not to do very carefully, and it decided, hey, we're going to execute what we want to do very well and laser target a particular aesthetic, a particular fantasy, right? So they did that super well. They're a great example of doing that on the indie scale. But again, Blizzard, they're a broad church. They've been successful because of that. They expanded the MMORPG genre outwards to people for whom Ultima was too hardcore. That's what World of Warcraft did. It's what it represented. When you look at a game like Overwatch 2, a good example there, my partner was a PC gamer, yes, but she was not, ever into shooters. Ever. But Overwatch 1 even was able to be a broad enough church that actually she found she could succeed, I think, push up to, was it Diamond or something? Right, but that's a pretty good example of the strength of Blizzard, being able to hold that broad church. So if they can do that to the already wildly popular, but I think still a decently gated off niche of the survival world, well, damn, then we could be talking about something. That's certainly what they will want to happen. Of course, can they continue to scale their company in a sustainable fashion? Can they improve the compensation that they are offering to people so that they can compete with venture capital-based startups and, of course, with the extremely well-funded likes of Riot Games? Can they fix up their cultural issues so that, as a very simple example, women can feel safe and protected in the workspace and can actually do good work because there's not crazy forms of bullshit going on? We've heard good things, but again, we've also recently heard sketchy things from the Activision Blizzard King, kind of more corporate level, when it comes to some union stuff. And that does feel pretty sketch, even though the vibes that we seem to be getting from quite a lot of Blizzard staff, in my case, from the World of Warcraft front, because that's the front that I'm the most personally exposed to, we're getting good vibes from those people, but what is still going on behind the scenes, we don't really know. That's the tricky thing. We're in this, Schrodinger's Blizzard situation. Nobody really knows what's going on inside the box right now. What needs to happen is a follow-up, a good follow-up, like what happened with Rockstar Games, right? Rockstar, and believe me, anyone in the industry will tell you this with Rockstar. And it actually does not take long to bump into ex-Rockstar people. Bumping into ex-Rockstar people who are, younger than me, which kind of makes me think, oh, shit, where'd my career slowed down, didn't it? There's ex-Rockstar people all over the place. And that thing with the Rockstar story is follow-up happened. And that follow-up did actually uncover that Rockstar had made really positive change in their company, and that people within the company were, broadly feeling good about its future direction. So I think with a lot of the journalistic coverage that happened, I would like it if we saw, the big name journalists who have got the sources in these companies, if we saw them actually go back and say, hey, guys, can we touch base again? Can we find out, it's been a year and a half since the big story with the DFEH broke. What's going on at Blizzard? My readers want to know before they dive into these games. So far, what I can say is some people, this is way back when, shit was actually going down. People told me that WoW's director did handle things like a champ internally, and that, made his team feel, pretty safe and listened to. So I heard that off the grapevine. I also heard that Blizzard, this is a little bit later I heard this, but I heard that they were significantly upping their offers in terms of compensation for roles. I don't exactly know if that applied to existing staff, but it certainly was applying to hiring. Now that said, I also do know from, plenty of people I talk to, it's really, hey, are you a technical artist? Well, if you're a technical artist, you move to California, there's buckaroonies for you. Everyone needs technical artists, but no, seriously, there has been, obviously a different macroeconomic environment now, but there has been quite a lot of money floating around the industry. And that does mean the jobs market is pretty damn tight. So, look at Blizzard changing some of those, compensation practices for new hires, and you do still have to think to yourself, all right, is this rectifying a problem? Is this meeting the criticism of, exploiting passion? Or is this just a tighter labor market and you need people, so you gotta up how much money you're offering? As much as I'd like to think the former, I do still suspect it probably is the latter, let's be real. Okay, so we've touched base with Diablo 4, now you're up to date a little bit more, and just a little bit of comment from me on the overarching Blizzard story, because I think that's something that people are pretty interested in, because the overarching Blizzard story going completely off the rails, falling down a cliff and catching fire, is in fact what, was maybe the most notable news story of, recent memory in the games industry. Alright, well, that's that. Hey, check out where World of Warcraft's going for your next video. We'll have more coming up soon, and I'll see you next time.